We've got an interesting legal story out of Quebec this week. And when I read the story, I said, we got to get Ari Goldkind on the line, a criminal defense lawyer and legal analyst. Now, after being convicted of sexually assaulting and taking explicit photographs of a sleeping woman, an engineer from Trois-Rivières was given a conditional release with 3 months probation. Now, the Crown was seeking an 18-month sentence. So let's find out what happened here. If this is par for the course on sentencing in this country. Ari Goldkind's with us. Ari, thanks for coming on.
Good to be with you, Elias. And in fact, the story is even worse than you described it, if you permit me to tell you why it's actually so concerning.
Yeah, I don't want. Yeah, that's it. I don't want to steal the guess.
Or found guilty of more than that. The victim woke up and felt fingers in her vagina, back and forth. Her detached, her camisole was hiked up, and he had private pictures of her genital parts. I'm trying to be delicate in this early morning hour on his phone. So this is actually a very serious finding of sexual assault. This is not some very minor thing where, I mean, I can make 100 examples, but sexual assault, Elias, as you know, in our criminal code, runs the range from touching somebody's, bum in a nightclub on a dance floor without their consent to full out rape, sort of like we talked about Headley a month or so ago.
Can I tell you something, Eric? I just want to thank you there. And it's so funny because I did not practice what I generally preach. I've actually spoken to journalism students about this as well. Sometimes I feel when we cover these kinds of stories, we just say sexual assault, and we don't actually say what the person did, and it really does matter so that we don't, because this is what happens now, especially on social media. We throw every single name under the same bus, so everyone turns into Harvey Weinstein, or everyone, And so thank you for actually, and we are on radio here, but you told us some of the details, and it actually matters, and I want to highlight that.
And Elias, if I may, and I know we're always tight on time and we have to pay bills with advertising, but let me tell you, your point, and I appreciate what you said, is actually something, if we're going to take the segment in that way, that I've complained about for years. I actually think the criminal code should not have this umbrella term sexual assault, which means so many different things. The word rape, in my view, should still have been in there. It signifies something different. I mentioned Headley because that's a high-profile case from a couple weeks ago. He was accused of full-blown, complete violent rape. You compare that to Jean Gomeshi, which many of your listeners know he was charged with sexual assault. And if you say to 9 people on the street in Montreal, what did Jean Gomeshi do? They're going to come out and say he was charged with raping women, which wasn't even in the zip code or ballpark of what the famous Jean Gomeshi was. So I actually think your point, which I appreciate you saying to me, is something that I think our criminal code and our criminal justice system should look at again, because it makes certain things equal that clearly are not.
And so let's get to this guy from Trois-Rivières here.
Which is an egregious story.
It's an egregious story. So, gentlemen, this guy's name, I was about to say gentleman, this guy's name, Simon Hull, okay? Engineer, okay? You went over what he was accused of. The Crown wants 18 months. He gets conditional discharge, 3 months probation. Tell me, Ari, is this what happens in Canada, in this country, in these kinds of cases, or is this really egregious?
No, and let me explain, because the term conditional discharge may not mean a lot to your listeners without some context, okay? 99.99999, and then add in about 6 more nines, Elias, of somebody who got found guilty of this will end up at the very least with what's called the criminal record. And as you know, a criminal record has very serious consequences on somebody going forward. For example, crossing the border, for example, applying for jobs, for example, keeping jobs, for example, getting a Nexus card. I can give you 100 examples, okay? 98.9% of the time, somebody who's found guilty of what you and I are talking about would go to jail. Now, whether they go to jail for 1 week, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depends on a number of things. We don't have time to get into them all, okay? He received what is called a conditional discharge, which is no criminal record whatsoever. It was done under the auspices that it would make his job as an engineer tough to do because it would make it harder for him to travel for work. Here's why this story is so problematic or interesting, or there's a piece missing, and I'll get to you. Tell me what our hard out is, and I'll make sure my answer is quick.
Yeah.
But here's why it should be so concerning to your listeners. It is very important that a judge take into account the accused's background, job, life, circumstances. That's very much a part of the sentencing process, whether people like it or not. But a judge cannot give what's called a manifestly unfit sentence or outside of an acceptable range of sentence if it's contrary to the public interest. What that means is even if my name is Ari Goldkind, but my real name is Mother Teresa,
Yeah.
if I drive to your studio in Montreal and I punch you in the face, I still have to get a sentence that fits driving to Montreal to punch Elias Makos in the face. It doesn't really matter that I'm Mother Teresa, okay? What the judge did here, and the Crown is appealing it, so this won't be the last time you and I talk about this, Elias, is gave a sentence that on its face, and here's the piece of the case that I would like to know more about because I don't know about it. He gave a sentence that in my view is contrary to the public interest, because if you're saying to the public that whether booze is involved or not, separate issues, you can digitally penetrate or take pictures of a woman's most private area on your phone, admit that you did it, but then don't even end up with a criminal record. That is something very concerning. And I'm a defense lawyer. I think this sentence is the greatest sentence he could have ever received. It's unheard of. But it's going to be appealed. The only way it makes sense, Elias, and I don't think this is the case, but the reporting doesn't reveal it, is if this man has been waiting in jail for a year or two and did a year or so of what's called pretrial custody, dead time, sort of like what Tamara Leach is doing right now, that changes my answer about the sentence. But if he was released on bail or released from the police station, never did a day of jail, never got a taste of jail, this sentence to me, based on the reporting, and that's all we know right now, Elias, should be not only of deep concern to all of your listeners, but deep concern to anybody, no matter what your politics are, that this is what the sentence is.
Wrapping up here with Ari Goldkind, criminal defense lawyer, talking about this case out of Trois-Rivières of a man convicted. He pled guilty of, as you put it, digitally penetrating a woman, taking photos of her most intimate parts. Let's make sure we know what we're talking about here, and we'll make that point again. Now, Ari, in Canada, I know people say that we're late on sentencing all the time.
I say that.
Yeah, yes. So we're not tough on this. So let me just ask you, 18 months, let's say what the Crown was asking for. I know every case is different, but in a similar kind of case, what is a normal sentence in this country?
That's a great question. And I talked about this with one of your colleagues the other day when it came to R. Kelly and Ghislaine Maxwell, where we're looking at sentences of 20 to 30 years. In Canada, both of those would probably have looked at no more than 2 to 3 to 4 years maximum for what they did. So we're talking,
wow.
Mars and Venus, if I can use that joke. But the 18 months the Crown was asking for was completely appropriate. He did not have a criminal record, no history of this. He's made amends. He's turned his life over. Perfectly appropriate Crown position. If I'm the defense lawyer and I'm thinking of something, it's anything from a suspended sentence, which means a criminal record but no jail, up to maybe a few months or weekends or condition, all sorts of options that I can't get into. But at the end of the day, the range, in my view, was somewhere at the very least between a criminal record and the 18 months, the conditional discharge. That's the part to me that really I think should be concerning to the public based on what we know. And Elias, all I know is what's being reported. I certainly have deep curiosity as to how this happened.
Ari, listen, thanks very much for coming on, shedding some light on this situation and just the whole thing, the sentencing, what normally is the case in this country. I really do appreciate it.
Always good to be with you.
That's Ari Goldkind, criminal defense lawyer and legal analyst.